A potential ban on a single smartphone brand might sound like pretty niche news, right? Easy to just dismiss.
Yeah, you might think OnePlus. How much does that really affect me?
Exactly. But for the US Android market, the implications could be, well, pretty dramatic. Maybe even ruinous, as some are suggesting.
It's definitely more than just one company disappearing.
We're talking about a ripple effect that could seriously reshape market competition, maybe even stifle innovation, diminish your choices, and potentially drive up prices across the whole Android ecosystem here in the States.
It touches a lot of bases.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to really unpack the intricate realities behind a headline like that. We're diving into a detailed report that looks at precisely why a hypothetical OnePlus ban isn't just about, one company. It's about the whole smartphone landscape you interact with every single day.
We've got the analysis ready.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the stakes here, let's start with the current situation. What does the U.S. smartphone market actually look like right now?
Well, it's a landscape defined by an incredibly pronounced duopoly, really dominated by two players.
Apple and Samsung, I see.
You got it. If we look at the numbers, as of September 2024, Apple commands a massive 57.39% of the U.S. market share.
Wow, almost 60%.
Yeah. And right behind them, Samsung holds 23.27%.
So together, that's over 80%.
Over 80% combined, exactly. And even more recent data, say Q1 2025 shipment figures, basically reinforces this. Apple at 57%, Samsung at 25%.
Okay.
And what's maybe even more telling is their grip on the global premium segment. Phones costing $600 or more wholesale.
The high-end stuff.
Right. In 2024, Apple led that with 67% globally. Samsung had 18%. And the U.S., the U.S. is the biggest contributor to that premium segment, accounting for a full quarter of it.
That is a staggering concentration. So basically, Apple and Samsung have the absolute lion's share of your choices.
They really do.
What about everyone else then? Where does a player like OnePlus even fit into that picture? Is it just lost in the noise?
Well, once you move beyond those two giants, the market share just drops off a cliff, really.
Okay.
You've got Google, for instance, hovering around 4.97%. Motorola, which is part of Lenovo, at about 3.59% market share, though their Q1 2025 shipments did show a bit of a bump to 11%.
Right.
Xiaomi is smaller still, 1.86%. And OnePlus itself, it's often just lumped under others in these U.S. charts, or sometimes included within OPPO's global figures.
And OPPO is a bigger player globally?
Yeah, OPPO, including OnePlus, was a global top 5 player. In 2024, they had about an 8% market share worldwide.
Okay, but still small in the U.S. specifically.
Numerically small in the U.S., yes. But here's what's really interesting, and kind of counterintuitive maybe.
Go on.
Despite that small U.S. market share, OnePlus is widely seen as one of the few genuinely high-quality alternative brands.
An alternative to Samsung and Google on the Android side?
Exactly. It's considered a real rival to both. Its presence is perhaps surprisingly pretty crucial in stopping the Android side of the market from just becoming a Samsung monopoly, effectively.
So its influence outweighs its percentage points.
Precisely. The reality is your options as a consumer in the U.S. are already quite limited.
Yeah.
And that makes the presence of any viable alternative, no matter how small its share seems on paper, strategically really significant for everyone.
That's a powerful point. A small player having an outsized strategic impact. So let's dig into that. What does OnePlus bring to the table? What's this never settle philosophy about that makes them important in such a concentrated market?
Well, their core mission, as they stated, is all about empowering users through better technology, creating premium, user-focused devices that actively, challenge market conventions and the status quo.
And never settle is the mantra driving that.
Right. It's not just marketing fluff, apparently. It genuinely seems to drive them towards constant improvement, trying to push boundaries.
Okay, but how does that actually show up in the phones? What makes a OnePlus device stand out from, say, a Samsung Galaxy or a Google Pixel?
Okay, a prime example is their software, their custom Android platform, Oxygen OS.
Heard good things about that.
Yeah, it's consistently praised. Some reviewers have even called it the best flavor of Android, maybe even better than Google's own Pixel software at times. It's known for lots of customization options and just being really fast and fluid.
Smoother performance.
Very smooth. Then on the hardware side, they've definitely been innovators, especially I'd say in battery technology and charging speeds.
Ah, fast charging is a big one.
Huge. The upcoming OnePlus 13, for example, is rumored to have this massive 6,000 mAh battery, plus really impressive 80W wired and 50W wireless charging.
Wow, that's quick.
It is. And their 2024 flagship, the OnePlus 12, already offered some of the fastest charging speeds you could get on the market at the time.
So they're really pushing the envelope on power and speed. What about other key areas like cameras or displays?
Absolutely. They've gotten recognition for camera quality too. The OnePlus 13 is being talked about for its incredible camera zoom, and the OnePlus 12 had what was called a flagship camera system.
Okay.
And displays. They were industry leaders there early on. Remember the 90 hertz display in the OnePlus 7 series?
Yeah, that was ages ago, relatively speaking. Made waves back then.
It did, long before high refresh rates became common. And beyond just the phones, they have a broader ecosystem: watches, earphones, even TVs in some markets. Plus, they seem to have a strong community focus, using things like open ears forums to get direct user feedback.
Interesting. So they're putting out all these premium features, this cutting-edge tech. How do they manage pricing? Are they super expensive?
That's another key part of their strategy: competitive pricing.
Hmm.
It's quite deliberate.
So not always cheap, but good value.
Kind of. You can get, say, their Nord N35G for around $300, which is definitely budget-friendly.
Hmm.
But their main flagships, like the upcoming OnePlus 13, are expected around the $1,000 mark.
Standard flagship price then.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And even their foldable, the OnePlus Open, launched at $1,700. The OnePlus 12 started at $709. So they compete across different price segments.
Right, from mid-range to premium.
Exactly. And this combination, the cutting-edge hardware paired with that competitive pricing, it positions OnePlus as a real catalyst for innovation in the market.
How so? A catalyst?
Well, think about it. When OnePlus introduces something like super fast charging or a new battery tech, Samsung and Google, they're not just watching idly. Their R&D teams feel that pressure. They have to respond, they have to try and catch up or leapfrog.
Ah, so it keeps the big guys on their toes.
Precisely. And that directly benefits you, the consumer,
Yeah.
even if you never buy a OnePlus phone yourself.
Because that competition drives advancements across the board. Better features show up everywhere.
That's the idea. That competitive pressure means everyone has to keep innovating, keep improving. You get better phones from all brands because of it.
Okay, so they're like the spark plug in the Android engine, keeping things firing. But this whole potential ban scenario, we've seen that the U.S. government take pretty drastic action against tech companies before, right? Particularly from China. What's the history here?
Oh, absolutely, we have. There's a very established history of the U.S. government imposing restrictions on foreign tech companies, especially those from China, and they consistently cite national security concerns.
Huawei and ZTE come to mind immediately.
Exactly. Those cases are critical for understanding the mechanisms, the justifications, and, frankly, the far-reaching consequences of these kinds of bans.
And how does this usually happen? What's the process?
The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, has been really instrumental. Their powers got more formalized with the Secure Equipment Act back in 2021.
Okay. And the reasons given for Huawei and ZTE?
Well, the allegations against both included things like ties to the Chinese government, concerns about cyber espionage, intellectual property theft, and also violations of U.S. sanctions.
Sanctions violations.
Yeah, ZTE, notably, faced its initial ban partly for violating sanctions against Iran and North Korea, and also for making what authorities called repeated false statements.
And these bans hold up legally.
It's important to note, that federal courts have consistently upheld these kinds of bans. They've generally ruled that the actions reasonably further non-punitive goals, like protecting national security and informational security.
So these aren't just political moves, they have legal backing. What was the actual impact on those companies, though, beyond just the headlines?
The impact was severe. Devastating, really. The ban on ZTE, for instance, effectively shut down its ability to even produce phones for a time.
Why? What specifically caused that?
Primarily losing access to critical U.S. source components, think Qualcomm chips, and crucially, Google's Android OS with Google Mobile Services.
Ah, the core building blocks.
Exactly. Huawei also faced, significant headwinds, as they put it. They had substantial layoffs. About 600 U.S. employees lost their jobs. And they had to halt planned U.S. research and development investments, which were pegged at around $600 million.
Wow. Okay, so dire consequences for the companies themselves. What about broader effects on the market, on U.S. businesses?
Well, beyond the companies, these actions really threw a spotlight on the fragility of the global telecom supply chain, how interconnected everything is. And inevitably, it led to reduced competition, particularly in the market for telecom network equipment. And yes, there were tangible economic repercussions for American businesses, too.
How so?
Huawei, for example, reported spending something like $11 billion annually on goods and services from U.S. companies. That business directly supported an estimated 50,000 U.S. workers.
And that business just vanished.
Pretty much vanished for those U.S. suppliers, yeah.
Yeah.
A significant economic hit.
That's a stark reminder of how interconnected things are.
Right.
But were these bans purely about those specific violations you mentioned, or was there maybe a broader geopolitical context?
Look, it's hard to ignore that there was certainly a, let's say, discernible underlying geopolitical dimension.
What makes you say that?
Well, Huawei's own senior vice president of public affairs actually noted at the time that some U.S. politicians want to use Huawei as a proxy of China.
Mm.
And similarly, ZTE's ban happened amidst a backdrop of pretty strong anti-China rhetoric in the political sphere.
So it suggests a potential systemic risk for any major Chinese tech company, regardless of specific actions.
It certainly suggests that possibility, yeah. This history really demonstrates that these bans are designed to be and have proven to be potentially fatal to a company's U.S. operations, especially when they rely heavily on U.S. technology like chip designs or operating systems.
Right.
It paints a really clear picture of the potential scale of disruption, not just for the company targeted, but potentially for you as a consumer and for U.S. businesses caught in the middle.
Okay. So if we pull all this together then, the incredibly concentrated market we talked about, OnePlus's unique contributions as that catalyst, and the sobering history of bans, what's the real forecast? What does this ruin scenario actually look like for the average U.S. Android phone user if OnePlus were to disappear? How would it specifically impact you?
Well, the argument is that it would have disproportionately severe consequences, specifically for the U.S. Android market. It could fundamentally alter its competitive dynamics, its innovation path, and your overall experience as a consumer.
How? Let's break that down. First, the market consolidation.
Right. We already established it's basically an Apple-Samsung duopoly. OnePlus is one of the very few high-quality alternatives genuinely challenging that on the Android side. Remember when LG exited the smartphone market back in 2021?
Yeah, that was a blow.
It was. And analysts noted how, after that, Android options beyond Samsung became much harder to come by in the U.S.
Pushing things even more towards just Samsung and maybe Google's Pixel.
Exactly. A OnePlus ban would accelerate that consolidation dramatically. It would severely limit your choices and reduce the competitive pressure on Samsung and Google to, well, innovate aggressively or even compete seriously on price.
Okay, less choice, less pressure. What about innovation directly? You called OnePlus a catalyst.
That's the second major impact. Stifled innovation. OnePlus is known for pushing cutting-edge hardware, for innovating in this space almost every year, particularly, as we said, in areas like fast charging, advanced battery tech, displays.
So those specific advancements might slow down market-wide?
Potentially, yes. Unique contributions like their silicon carbon battery technology, those advanced charging speeds, the enhanced camera zoom features, even their clean Oxygen OS software, those would just be gone from the U.S. market.
And the knock-on effect.
In a less competitive market, Apple and Samsung simply have less incentive to compete aggressively on features or price, especially here in the U.S. where they're so dominant. As some reports put it, smaller brands doing cool stuff can't break through.
So losing OnePlus means losing that specific innovation vector, that spur.
Precisely. It could lead to a slower pace of advancement in certain areas across the entire Android market available to you.
Okay, so fewer options, potentially slower innovation. What about the direct impact on, what's on the shelf and what we actually pay?
That leads straight to diminished consumer choice and value. Point blank. A ban would seriously limit the range of high-quality Android alternative available in this country.
Fewer phones to choose from.
Fewer distinct options, yeah. And when there's less competition, what often happens?
Prices might creep up.
Dominant players have less incentive to compete on price. So yes, you could absolutely see potential price increases on devices down the road.
And beyond price. Any other subtle effects?
Well, there's even that subtle but real green bubble phenomenon in messaging.
Ah, the iMessage versus Android chat bubble colors.
Exactly. Some argue that when there's a lack of strong, diverse, appealing Android alternatives, it can subtly nudge users towards iPhones just for smoother social interaction, further shrinking Android's perceived diversity here and maybe even creating a bit of social stigma.
Interesting point. Less diversity overall.
Yeah. And finally, it creates ecosystem vulnerabilities. Think about Android globally. Its strength comes from this really complex web of different manufacturers, EMs, developers, carriers, regulators. all fostering a huge range of devices.
Diverse ecosystem.
Very diverse globally. But removing an OEM, even one with a relatively small U.S. market share like OnePlus, it diminishes the overall diversity and resilience of that ecosystem within the U.S.
Makes the U.S. market less representative of Android's global strengths.
Exactly. It weakens that inherent diversity. It makes the U.S. Android market much more susceptible to the strategic whims of just two major players, Samsung and Google Pixel.
So the whole ecosystem becomes less robust, maybe less innovative in the long run.
That's the concern. And that directly impacts the features you'll have access to, the designs you'll see, and yes, potentially the prices you'll pay for your next smartphone. It's fundamentally about how vibrant and competitive your personal tech landscape will be going forward.
Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dive, a hypothetical OnePlus ban, it seems, is far from just a minor disruption affecting one company's fans.
No, not at all.
It's potentially a systemic weakening of the entire U.S. Android ecosystem's diversity, its dynamism, its innovative edge.
Exactly. That ruin scenario we talked about really involves a significant and arguably detrimental shift in competitive dynamics, innovation pathways, and ultimately consumer choices and value.
And while those national security concerns, as we saw with Huawei and ZTE, are clearly paramount and have driven policy,
Absolutely, they are paramount.
it seems policymakers have to carefully weigh those concerns against these potentially substantial economic and market consequences for U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses.
It's a complex balancing act, no question.
Which really raises a final important question, maybe something for you, our listener, to consider. How do we, as a society, strike that balance between the crucial imperatives of national security on one hand and the long-term health, the innovation, the competitiveness of these technology markets that really define so much of our daily lives on the other?
What are the trade-offs? What are you willing to gain, perhaps in security, and what might you be willing to lose in terms of choice, innovation, or even price when these incredibly complex decisions are made?
Something to definitely ponder the next time you pick up your phone. Consider those unseen forces, those market dynamics and policy decisions shaping the tech you use every single day.